Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's lecture in public speaking class, in which we will answer the essential question, what are the 9 aspects of delivery? We are getting into the unit where we talk about how we deliver and perform a speech in front of the class or in front of an audience. So we're moving on from how an audience listens to how the speaker delivers a speech. And there are 9 important aspects to that process, which we will be discussing in today's lecture. The first aspect of delivering a speech is volume. Volume is essentially how loud you speak and how you project your voice. If you have good volume, that means you are loud. You project your voice in a manner that is clear, and your words are very precisely spoken. So when you see the word enunciation, what that's talking about is how clearly you are speaking and how clearly the audience can understand you. If you have expert volume, you want to be increasing your volume or decreasing your volume for emphasis or to add importance. So you are intentionally controlling your volume as one of the ways in which you are trying to convey your message to the audience. It's often good to follow up a loud sentence with a quieter one, or vice versa. What you want to avoid in terms of your volume is being too quiet. If the audience is straining to hear you, that is going to take away from your credibility as a speaker. And you also don't want to have normal conversational volume, because when you're doing a public speech, normal conversational volume is too quiet. And if you are personally or culturally kind of conditioned to be quieter, this is going to involve stepping out of your comfort zone and projecting yourself and asserting yourself to the audience as a way of expressing confidence and making sure that everyone in the room, especially if it's a large room, can hear you. You do not want to be too loud. You don't want to be screaming, but you want to be loud enough that your audience can hear you clearly and not strain in any way. You also don't want to muffle or speak in an unclear way, and you also don't want to mumble your words like no one understands what you're saying. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do what I just did there. So, volume is aspect 1 of delivering a speech. It should say 2. Aspect 2 of delivering a speech is pitch. Pitch is basically the variety in the tone of your voice. So whether you're using a low tone, a mid tone, or a high tone, that's basically having some oscillation in the way your voice sounds, so that it doesn't always sound like this, like you're monotone, but you want to have some dynamism in your voice. You want to have some life in your voice. You want to have that certain je ne sais quoi in your voice that conveys to the audience that you are a good speaker. And if you're an expert level at conveying good pitch, you will increase or decrease the pitch of your voice to add commentary, show attitude, or add emphasis. In speech and debate events, this is especially important in your programmed oral interpretation. It's important in your poetry reading, because you're literally stepping in and out of character, and one of the ways you convey your pitch is to alter it. So, as far as your pitch goes, these are things to avoid. You do not want to be monotone. Who wants to listen to this? You don't want to have too much variation in pitch, so people are saying, what's going on here? You don't want to end your phrases with a high pitch when it isn't a question. Often when we're asking questions, we actually will end a sentence in high pitch, and that's one of the things that conveys to people that it is a question. You don't want to sound sick, okay? So if you are sick, you're going to have to work through that, because you don't want to come across as sounding like something is wrong with you, like something's stuck in your throat, or you've got a gravelly chain smoker's voice, or anything like that. You want your voice to sound healthy and clear, and you don't want to sound shaky. If your pitch is shaky, you are going to convey to the audience that you are nervous and that is not a message you want to send. Aspect number 3 to delivering a speech is called rate. And rate is basically the pace at which you speak. So essentially, you could be talking at this pace, in which case it's really hard for people to understand you, or you could be talking at this pace, which might cure the insomnia of people in your audience. So if you have a good rate, you're speaking slowly and clearly, and you have even pacing, so the audience can absorb the content of your speech. Oftentimes, when you're new to public speaking, there's a tendency to want to talk faster to get it over with. But if you talk faster to get it over with, you're taking away the ability of the audience to truly absorb what it is you're trying to say. So intentionally slowing down just a tad, just a skosh, is something you want to consider. If you are an expert at rate, you will be able to intentionally and methodically slow down to bring the audience's attention to something important, or to intentionally and methodically speed up to designate lesser importance to different aspects of your speech, or if you're just reviewing. What you will want to avoid with your rate is speaking too fast. Most people who give a speech in class speak too fast because there's this I want to get it over with vibe going on, and you really need to step out of your discomfort and realize going quickly is not your friend. You also want to avoid speaking too slowly because you will put your audience to sleep. So you also don't want to change your pace fast and slow to confuse the audience. You do not want to confuse the audience. So make sure the pace you choose is intentional and is designed for effect. Aspect number 4 to speaking is rhythm. Rhythm is a musical concept, but it is also a speaking concept. And if you have good rhythm, you're using natural patterns, pauses, and flow in the way you speak to make it sound like you are fluent and fluid. You want the audience to think that you're fluent and fluid, that you can ebb and flow with the emotion and the content and the moment of your speech. Because depending on the kind of speech you're giving, you're going to want to convey a different vibe at different parts of the speech. And your rhythm is part of what conveys that vibe, that energy, that feeling that you want your audience to have at any given point in time. So if you're an expert at rhythm, you're going to emphasize a single word to add significance. You're going to add pauses to allow an increase in the tension. That's often called a pregnant pause. When you have a pause in a speech, it leaves a moment there where the audience is both reflecting and anticipating. The moment is pregnant with opportunity, and then you want to follow that up with something powerful. You also want to add some flow to pull the audience in. And if you've ever heard a good public speaker, if you listen to the Martin Luther King Jr. I Have a Dream speech, it has enormous flow to it, has enormous rhythm to it, has cadence. If you're a musician, think of your speech and the way you deliver your speech as being like playing a magnificent piece of music that just flows magnificently. That's what you want to aspire to. What you want to avoid is long pauses where people think, what's going on here? Why is there this pause? No pauses at all. You need to give the audience time to digest what you're saying, or pauses that are unnatural. And we won't dwell too much on that. You also want to avoid distracting or confusing speech patterns that are not rhythmic in nature. You do not want dissonance. Dissonance may be a musical tool, but dissonance in speaking is something that makes it very difficult for the audience. So you will want to avoid having dissonant speaking patterns. Aspect number 5 is eye contact, and this is a challenging one because it's something you need to be intentional about, and it's something you need to premeditate, and it's something that needs to go with the flow of your speech. And basically, if you have good eye contact, you're using the appearance of consistent eye contact with the entire audience. So at a minimum, you want to be looking to different parts of the room at different points of your speech. If you're only looking to the right, or you're only looking to the center, or you're only looking to the left, or you're only looking to the front, or you're only looking to the back, you are sending the message to people elsewhere in the audience that you're not talking to them. You want everybody in the room to feel like you're talking to them. If you are an expert at eye contact, you're going to use direct eye contact to grab an individual audience member's attention or to reward those already paying attention. So you definitely want to zero in on people who seem like they're engaged with what you're saying and affirm them with your eye contact. If you see that people are engaged with what you're saying and you affirm them with your eye contact, you are drawing more people in. More people are going to be like, I want that affirmation. And it's kind of a cycle that feeds on itself. You want to avoid staring at your notes the whole time. Your notes are there to glance at. They are not there to read, which is why when you're doing a lot of set pieces for speech and debate, you want to have them memorized. But the notes are there in case you experience cerebral flatulence and you need to kind of reset your thoughts. But you don't want to look at your notes for very long. You don't want to be looking down at the floor or up at the ceiling. That tells the audience, this person is afraid of me. You don't want to communicate that you're afraid of the audience. You want to communicate that you are there to engage with the audience, that they are part of the experience of speaking, which should be obvious. And you want to avoid looking at one person for too long. You definitely don't want people in the audience to feel like you're singling them out or that they're your chosen person to focus on, because that can just get weird. So you want to avoid that. Aspect number 6 is movement. You need to move around when you're speaking. If you are stationary, if it looks like your feet are glued to the ground, that is going to convey a certain level of discomfort to the audience, and you do not want to convey that discomfort. So you want to plant your feet shoulder width apart. Do not keep your feet together. You want to keep them about 1.5 to 2 feet apart. And there you'll use very little movement. Or another option is called walking in a triangle, where you basically walk from one point to another of an imaginary triangle that's on the ground. And as you walk from one point on that triangle to another, you're focusing on different parts of the audience so that all parts of the audience feel included. So movement and eye contact go together as part of the flow of presentation. You also want to use your proximity to audience members to adjust their behavior. This is a teacher trick. You will notice that teachers, when we have behaviors we want to adjust or do something about, we will walk closer to the person who is exhibiting that behavior. And sometimes that very act of movement solves the problem for us before we have to say anything. It's no different when you're public speaking. Some of the tools we're teaching you here are tools that teachers use to be effective in the classroom. Hopefully this teacher does. What you want to avoid is pacing back and forth, distracting movements that just don't seem to flow, and the speaker's dance, where it looks like you're nervous or you need to use the restroom and that you're basically showing the entire audience how anxious you are. You can actually use movement to kind of channel some of your nervous energy and not let the audience know you have it, but you need to practice that. If you are an expert at movement, you're going to use your body movement to punctuate an idea. So if you're making a key point, you're going to make that point with your voice, you're going to make that point with your eyes, and you're going to make that point with the way you move. So all of these are things that demonstrate good movement in the delivery of a speech. Number 7 is posture. How do you hold your body when you're speaking? Are you relaxed and upright? You don't want to appear stiff or rigid. If you appear stiff or rigid, the audience is going to think that you're not comfortable, and they're not going to be comfortable. You want your knees to be lightly bent with your back and head straight. So you do not want to hold your body tightly. You want to have your elbows and your knees somewhat loose and flexible. And this takes practice. It might be wise to practice in front of a mirror a few times and see. We all know how we feel when we look at ourselves doing selfies or taking videos for social media. You know, we're never as comfortable looking at ourselves as other people are with looking at us. You want to be comfortable looking at yourself as you're preparing to give a speech. Imagine in your mind's eye how you're presenting yourself. If you are an expert at good posture, you will present a posture of high expectations where your arms are at your sides, one hand across your stomach, or both hands across your stomach, okay? What you want to avoid is slouching or leaning. So you don't want to slouch if you're standing, and you don't want to lean on the podium. You don't want your hands on your hips. That's a defensive position. You don't want your hands behind your back because it looks like you're hiding something. Or you don't want your hands as a fig leaf held in front of you. You can probably envision that in your head. So don't hold on to the podium, and don't act like you're in the military and you're a rigid automaton. You are not a rigid automaton. You are a human, and you want to convey your humanity even as you're trying to exemplify control and command over yourself and the audience. So here are some examples of posture. These are high expectations posture. Hands at your sides, one hand in front of your stomach, or both hands in front of your stomach. That is actually, on the one on the right, position 3, you can even have your hands clasped, and you can like move your hands in a certain way that makes points. I'll demonstrate that for you in class. That's kind of hard to talk about. I kind of have to demo that. So I'll do that in class. All right. The 8th important thing to consider in delivering a speech is expression, your facial expressions, your bodily expressions. If you have good facial expressions, you look relaxed but professional, and you use a slight smile or welcoming expression. This is something you want to think about in a job interview. If you go in and you don't seem relaxed and you don't seem like you're happy to be there, people in the room are going to pick up on that, and your chances of getting that job are going to decrease. If you are expert at expression, you're going to use your facial and body expressions to add emotional meaning, or you're going to use expression to adjust the audience's behavior. So that's extremely important, and you want to be intentional and you want to be thoughtful about that. That is an important skill to learn, not just in public speaking class, but in life, especially in situations where you want to exercise a certain degree of command and confidence. What you want to avoid is not having any facial expression at all. I'm going to be honest, when I was younger, I struggled with this. People had trouble reading me because my facial expressions were always pretty flat. And I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten better about that. You don't want to use confusing, distracting, or negative facial expressions. So we can think of acronyms that might represent some of these facial expressions. I'm not going to say that in a classroom YouTube video, but we know when people are mad dogging or something like that with their facial expressions. We know what's going on when we're getting negative facial expressions, and you want to avoid that when you're giving a speech. And you want to avoid too much emotion or inappropriate emotion during your speech. You want to make sure that what you're conveying with your facial expression is consistent with what you're conveying with your words, is consistent with what you're conveying with your posture, is consistent with what you're conveying with your body language. You want all of that to be consistent and unified so that all aspects of your presentation are making the same statement to the audience. And the final aspect of public speaking in front of the audience and delivering your speech is gestures. And this is the one that it's the thing that people seem to intentionally do the most. If you watch politicians If you watch people giving speeches, you kind of notice that certain speakers have certain gestures that they do all the time. And as an audience member, you can ask yourself, well, what do I think when they're doing that? Is it effective? Is it not effective? Or is it something that makes me laugh? All of those can be true. When it comes to gestures, you want to limit the movement of your hands and arms. You do not want the audience to think that you're flailing around, gesturing everywhere. I can make examples of that in class. Or you also want to occasionally use gestures for emphasis or expression. So you want to use gestures rarely enough so that when you actually use them, you're using them to convey a point. If you're good at using gestures, you're going to use those gestures to illustrate your ideas with your hands or use them to grab the attention of your audience. This is something teachers work on and try to do when we're emphasizing certain points in our lectures or when we're giving notes, is we'll use gestures to emphasize a point or emphasize a specific vocabulary term if that vocabulary term happens to have some verisimilitude with the concept that we're teaching. What you want to avoid with your gestures is nervous tics. These are movements you make without realizing it. And everybody has them, including yours truly. This is something we need to intentionally work through and beyond. If you can work through and beyond your nervous tics, you are going to be much more successful, not just at public speaking, but at doing life. And you also want to avoid distracting, repetitive, or confusing gestures. You want to make sure your gestures are aligned with what it is you're trying to convey in your speech. And ladies and gentlemen, if you can do all 9 of these things well, the sky is the limit for what you can achieve, not just in public speaking class, but in life. And with that, it's time to write a summary. You have 9 specific aspects of delivery that you now know about, which should be more than enough to write a 6 to 8 sentence summary. In that summary, you should definitely emphasize what the most important aspects of delivery are, what distinguishes good qualities of delivery from expert qualities, and what common traits the aspects that should be avoided have in common. So in other words, what do the good aspects of delivery have in common, and what do the aspects you want to avoid having in common? So if you can do those things in a summary, you're going to write a pretty amazing summary. And with that, this is Mr. Blumendahl signing off on this lecture in public speaking class. I hope it's been helpful.